You know, I used to consider it penis envy, but it's really deeper than that. What we're looking at now is a new gender paradigm, right? And it's a paradigm rooted in this kind of revisionist black patriarchy narrative where black men must now be subservient to black females and LGBTs, right? It's a response to what's perceived as a privilege that black men have, mainly that people know when we die unjustly. That's really what it waters down to. So in essence, we're doubly sidelined by both white supremacy and this new gynocentric black gender rhetoric. And that's supposed to mean or stand for a new justice narrative. Either way, black men find themselves erased, and that shit'll only last as long as we allow it. What's good, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Trying to get it together. Slowly getting my voice back, so bear with me, right? But had a good weekend, you know what I mean? My son turned 17, so I kind of ended up throwing him an impromptu birthday outing. Wanted to take him paintballing, but there weren't any in Fresno. I guess they all closed down during the pandemic. So it ended up being laser tag, and I basically had him call a bunch of his people. And I, said, let's all meet up at the spot. Paid for everything, gave everybody their cards, and said, call me to come pick you up, when you're ready. And it was probably the most bachelor birthday party I've ever thrown him. Every woman I talked to after that was like, well, did you get the kid's number? Did you get health information? Did you contact the parents? I was like, I ain't do none of that shit. He's 17. His people are teenagers. Meet up at the spot. I pay for food. I pay for the events. Y'all go do your thing. Call me at 10 o'clock at night when you're done. That's what it is. I went home, watched the movies, you know what I'm saying? And luckily everything went smooth, but every woman I talked to was like, no, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. Bachelor, baby. That's what it is. So anyway. He had a ball, and he's doing his thing. Anyway, that said, y'all know what it is. We over here talking about the woman king. And this is something that, we've been hearing about for the last year, if not more. This is something Black Hollywood, most particularly Black feminist Hollywood, has been excited about, because there's been an ongoing kind of fetishization of strength in the Black community. And in general, as far as women are concerned, because how often do you hear about women in representation with, or hell, even just described personally, where they don't include some reference to strength, strong womanhood, strong Black womanhood, this strength idea I want to get to the core of. Because in essence, I find it problematic. One, it assumes that there's only one kind of strength. And two, it assumes in many instances a male standard of strength. Right? And so if women in and of themselves are constantly being compared and measured against a standard of strength, and this is something that they're being inundated with since childhood, since toddlership, there's a problem. It is a male/masculine idea of strength that we see in social life and in media that is constantly being reaffirmed, reasserted on a regular basis. And I think it's just only helped to enhance and exacerbate an ongoing idea we've seen since at least, post 1865, where in one vein, Black men were not considered men. Black women were not only considered, not women, but they were not considered feminine. They were considered masculine. And I think that's been exacerbated even more with the participation of Black women in regard to Black feminist narratives about strength, which usually reduces to mimicking male strength. And that's what we see. Even in something like The Woman King. I mean, the title alone. And tonight I'm going to do a show talking about Thor. We're going to see even more of that because we've been seeing the representations of Black women across genres has been incredibly masculinist in its framing. And yet it's regarded as some type of feminist success, right? To see women in masculine positions. And that's what the big push is now, right? If you can make the feminine masculine and the masculine feminine, this is supposed to be cutting edge gender, right? That's what it's supposed to be. I find it simplistic and superficial, but this is where we are. So here's the thing. We're going to look at a little bit about this movie. And of course, I want to save most of my critique for when I actually get to see it, but let's examine what we can about it so far. Right? So you got Lashana Lynch, you got Viola Davis, of course, John Boyega, tends to play in these roles. Sheila Tim, and I don't know if I pronounced her last name right. We've seen her in Doctor Strange. I've seen her in Halle Berry's last film, where Halle was an MMA fighter. In all honesty, did not know if she was female for a minute. So, and I think that's being celebrated in this particular culture, right? People who can blur the lines of gender representation, right? And you can see the kind of cast from here. Right? A lot of what appears to be Africans. You have some African-American women. You might have some African-Americans with, African names. You know what it is. You see a mix. You got all kinds of Black faces. Beautiful Black faces at that. Let's look at it. So let's look at a few things in terms of the people behind the camera. So here we go. This is Maria Bello. Maria Bello, you've seen in a number of different films over the years. If you're a geek like me, you've seen her in History of Violence. You've seen her in Lights Out. She was in Coyote Ugly. You go down, see a few other things she's been in. Max Steel, she played the mother in that. So a few other things, right? Demonic, Law and Order, so on and so forth. See a number of things here. Now, the reason I bring that up is because when you actually look at what it says about her on IMDb, born in 1967, Pennsylvania, she is of Italian and Polish descent. Yeah. So, look at the the Woman King. Principal story is written by Maria Bello and then Dana Stevens. What we know about Maria Bello is she's an actress, a producer, and a writer who's of Italian and Polish descent. White women love to tell stories about Black women and masculinity, right? They're presenting it as their primary drive as white feminists to become as masculine and strong, because males are the standard, right, as possible. But strangely enough, they still get married. And they put all of this masculine energy on Black women and laud it. But they go home to their husbands. But anyway, let's look at Dana Stevens. So we know, according to what's on IMDb, Dana Stevens wrote the screenplay and helped with the story, apparently. So her and Maria wrote it together, and then she wrote the screenplay. And who is she? Writer, producer, actress, right? Guest starring on shows like Family Ties, in her early days. Phoenix, Arizona, and then, went from there. Screenplays include Fatherhood, starring Kevin Hart. I did a write-up on my blog about that particular piece. I did not like it, had serious issues with it. She's in it. For the Love of the Game with Kevin Costner, City of Angels. Basically, what this record means is this is probably one of the whitest women you've ever met in your life. There she goes. Those are your two authors for The Woman King. Not the Woman Queen, because, to be a queen is now some type of setback. You got to be the king. But you can't just have two white women write this and have it be lauded. So what do? You get a Black woman or several to okay it. So we've seen all the Black women on the front of the camera that will be validating this. And this is the writer, producer, director, or really the director for this film, right? Gina Prince Bythewood. Bythewood, I think it's pronounced. I may have gotten that wrong. She created Love and Basketball, Disappearing Acts, you know. Yeah, Gina Prince Bythewood. And for all intents and purposes, from what I can tell, you know, and I've seen many, you know, many of her works. I've never really read up a lot on her, but you know, very beautiful. You know, done a lot of the, you know, films that many of us have seen: Secret Life of Bees, The Old Guard, Shots Fired, Love and Basketball. A lot of black female centered films, right? Wrote Beyond the Lights, right? And she's also married to Reggie Rock Bythewood, right? And Reggie has been involved in a number of things you guys have probably seen over the years. He actually wrote the screenplay for Spike Lee's Get on the Bus. He helped write Notorious. Been around for a long time, you know, doing all kinds of films. So, you know, you can look him up. If you're not familiar, he produced Beyond the Lights. So one of the things that he and his wife apparently do, and he was heavily involved in New York Undercover. Right? That was he was the producer, supervising producer for New York Undercover back in the 90s. He's got a pretty extensive kind of thing. And he and his wife apparently met on the set of, oh man, what was it? I was just looking at it the other day. He met on the set of that motorcycle movie, black motorcycle movie. It ain't like there's a whole lot of them, so y'all probably know what it is before I would. I think it's in here. The Biker Boys. Yeah. So apparently they met on the set of that. They got together and they produce and direct each other's projects. They write together, so on and so forth. So they found Gina, apparently. I don't know if she got onto this early. I don't know if they, you know, brought her into it, but she is definitely the behind the camera, you know, authentication of it, so to speak. And, you know, she's married to a brother and they have two sons. Now, unless those sons were adopted, I would assume they're both black. Yet she's a pretty staunch, you know, gynocentric, you know, director. She tends to do gynocentric projects, but she's not limited to that. Nevertheless, this is a story by two white women, acted by plenty of beautiful black faces, directed by a black woman, written by two white women. This is what we tend to find happens a lot in black Hollywood. So that's what we're dealing with. There have been some interesting reactions to this piece. Now, I should say the film was also produced by Maria Bello and Viola Davis. So, you know, music by Terrence Blanchard, right? So as much as they'll tell you, you know, brothers never help with anything, brothers help with everything from Color Purple to this. And even if it's hot garbage, brothers help. And then they don't get credit for it because then brothers are accused of being whatever, patriarchal, exploitive, don't want to help women, so on and so forth. But you can find black men involved in all of these projects and never get shouted out for it. And I'm not wholly upset about that because a lot of this shit is just really problematic and exploitive of black men or the black male image, one way or another. But there have been, you know, there have been several problems with this type of black feminist production, and it's been going for years now. When it comes to the Dahomey Amazons, as they're colloquially referred to, we've seen narratives of this kind of extend into other things prior to, you know, the Woman King, especially if you saw Lovecraft Country, and you know, you've seen scenes of where they wanted to go with this. And I'll probably share a clip on my Patreon of that. Nevertheless, that's been one of the big ones. The Lovecraft Country, where you got to see the earliest, you know, kind of glimpses of what, you know, black women in Hollywood and in media wanted to see in terms of representation, right? Dahomean Amazons who identified as men, right? And exemplified masculinity. And so in the critiques about this, let's refer to some of the things I've seen recently. So this is from Moana Kotunin. I may have mispronounced his name. This was on Twitter. I don't know him, but he had an interesting statement that I thought I'd share. And this is actually something that Yvette Carnell shared, you know, kind of talking about the ways in which people laugh at ADOS, Black Americans who support this kind of shit, despite the historical implications of these stories. So let's see what Moana has to say about it. He says, I love history, but it's sad to see the glorification of Dahomey female soldiers, also known as Ogoji or Ahosi. The role of Dahomey is undeniable in the Atlantic slave trade. The kingdom went as far as to oppose the end of slavery, waging a war against those who were trying to stop the trade. It's even strange that it's an African American making such a movie, glorifying a slave trading West African kingdom, which descendants are unrepentant about their role in that trade. Now, just to be clear, we don't know if they're going to criticize or even depict the slavery aspect of Dahomey history and culture. We'll see what they do with that. But again, this is two white women writing it, and I would more than bet money that their concern is more feminism and the representation of strong women than it is historical accuracy about African slavery. But I haven't seen the film yet, so we'll wait to see if that's the case or if it ends up being something else. Nevertheless, I think the emphasis still is going to remain on, female masculinity more so than anything else, because this is supposed to be a representation of strength, remember? So it continues. The palm oil business in Dahomey was suggested to the king as a revenue substitute to the slave trade. So he kept the captured slaves in the palm plantations instead. Dahomey slave plantations have been copied by many West African kings and chiefs during the colonial period for free labor, therefore continuing the slave trade, but this time in Africa. Reason why the real name for the colonial period is the third mass slavery. Number one being Arab, which is the longest slave trade, which is argued to still be happening to this day. Number two being European, which was shorter, but much more global and expansive. And then three, Africans on Africans mass slavery. Something that I believe, in accordance with BGS and Dennis Sperling, that African Americans actually need to draw up lawsuits about. But anyway, it says, I seldom go with the praise people have for the Amazon soldiers. They were mainly slave traders' troops. Real talk. And I agree with that assessment, because I think that's ultimately what we're dealing with here, right? In this glee to represent gender on terms where you reverse the poles and, demonstrate, and you see this in the trailer as well, how much more masculine Black women can be than men, right? That seems to be the ultimate goal of a lot of this, right? To demonstrate female strength to the point where it dominates men. Right? And this is supposed to be the new cutting edge of gender. And what you end up with in this strange kind of narrative is this kind of idea where Black women can, in one vein, be empowered, like, Black men, be it sexually, be it in terms of their intimidating, capability to other people, to be empowered like white men and have that societal power, and yet to be, worshipped and pedestalized like white women. You see, this very strange amalgam of ideas in many of the representations of Black women we see in media, especially recently, and most particularly in sci-fi. It's some really strange shit that's happening right now that has to do with taking narratives from white women and men and Black men, and in some kind of way demonstrating that Black women are inherently more pure, inherently more wise, inherently better beings than all three components. It is intersectionality on steroids with a heavy dose of dominating other men. But just for the sake of historical accuracy, this is going to be a very short video, so I'm not going to be up here much longer. How did the Dahomean Amazons actually fare? What we do know is that they came about due to an absence of many of the African soldiers, many of the Dahomean soldiers who were either dead or enslaved themselves. And so they came about in response to an absence. And so some of the material you can read on this suggests as follows. The spirit of masculine Black femininity has different roots. Oh, that's actually something I wrote earlier. Different roots in Dahomean culture than in the contemporary U.S., although there are some overarching similarities. Much of it is attributed to the loss of so many men to war and enslavement. That said, how did they actually fare in battle? It says by the mid-19th century, they numbered between 1,000 and 6,000 women, about a third of the entire Dahomey army, according to reports written by visitors. These documented reports also indicated that the women soldiers suffered several major defeats. In the First Franco-Dahomean War, the Amazons participated in one major battle, Cotonou, where thousands of Dahomey, including many Amazons, charged the French lines and engaged the defenders in hand-to-hand combat. Despite the compliments given to them by Europeans, the Amazons were decisively crushed, with several hundred Dahomean troops being gunned down. Reportedly, 129 Dahomey were killed in the melee combat with the French lines. In the Second Franco-Dahomean War, against the military unit with a decidedly superior weaponry and a longer bayonet, the Dahomey Amazons could not prevail. During a battle with French soldiers at Atagon on 6th of October during the Second War, the bulk of the Amazon Corps were wiped out in a matter of hours in hand-to-hand combat after the French engaged them with bayonet charge. The Dahomey lost 86 regulars and 417 Dahomey Amazons, with nearly all of those deaths being inflicted by bayonets. The French lost 6 dead. So why do I bring that up? This is actually, something that was inspired by listening to a recent interview with Judge Joe Brown. When he was asked about the Dahomey and Amazons, he didn't have the heart to actually say what happened with them. What he said was, he just kind of put his head down and he was like, look it up. It didn't last as long and it didn't go as well as people want to think. And that's all he said. So upon looking it up, we kind of found out. And the reason, I bring that up is, yes, it was inspired partly in response to, his silence on the matter. And I wanted to get at why he was silent, and I understand it now. But the other reason I bring it up is because there's such a major push to masculinize and support the masculinization of Black women, to the point where you can't even call it a masculinization, because we want to disrupt the existence of this masculine feminine spectrum or pole. You want to dismiss it altogether so that you can have this kind of, there is no gender, in and of itself. To push for all of this, what it ends up being more than anything for Black women is their masculinization. And of course, that also means that Black men find themselves either feminized or made asexual, right? We're actually not part of the equation. Black women bring us around when it comes to occasional sex, maybe reproduction, but ultimately we're viewed as concuserves. We're lesser beings in a certain way. And much of the Black female imagination in the Black community. White society sees us as a threat, as something to be forcibly employed, incarcerated, and by forcibly employed, I mean used as carceral labor or done away with altogether. We have no relevance as far as they're concerned in a system, a white supremacist system. So by both narratives, a Black feminist narrative and a white supremacist narrative, which are more closely aligned than not, Black men don't exist in any respectful manner. They don't exist. And this is why so much of these kinds of productions bother us, because they speak to something that many of us can't voice. There's an animosity toward the Black male image that many of us have seen represented in white mediums and in Black female-led mediums. And we've been trying to find our way in both. And it's highly problematic. And it needs to be called out for what it is. But I bring out Dahomean history as far as the Amazons for a reason, because if you're going to really push this masculine line for Black women, I wanted to see how it actually ended historically. And it did not end well. But now it's being treated as a badge of honor for Black womanhood as a whole. And it's being resurrected and held up now as another exemplar or archetype that Black women can live out. Harboring masculine strength. Mimicking men and dominating men at the same time. You even see this in the trailer, as I pointed out. And this is supposed to be a social good. You thought the lines of difference between Black men and women were already bad? Keep up with this and see what happens. There's a reason that so many Black men are pulling away, and these kinds of productions add to it. Peace.